Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. Okay, so I'm doing it, I'm taking the plunge. I am going to participate and make Lori Holt's Sweet Land Sew Along quilt. So this begins on May 19th, and I have the kit from Fat Quarter Shop. I have my Sew Simple Shapes. I have my sewing guide. I have all my stuff pretty much gathered that I'm going to need, and we're going to make this quilt. So if you are going to be sewing along, or if you've been on the fence, you can't decide whether or not you want to do it because maybe you just need a little extra help, or maybe you want to hear some tips and tricks from someone else that's making it. Maybe you just want, let's be honest, maybe you just want to know someone else is making this quilt and you have someone to reach out to and say, hey, I'm stuck, help. So I'm your girl. I'm here for you. I promise you that I will not leave you hanging too badly. And I will start recording the videos with the sew along to start building our Sweet Land quilt. This is such a fabulous fabric collection. It's so pretty. Love the colors, love the quilt design, love the Lori Holt applique method. All right, so in this video, what we are going to do is I'm just going to share some of the things I do to get prepared and get ready for a sew along that's coming up with Lori Holt. So like I said, you need your Sew Simple Shapes. You need your sew along guide. You need some fabric. If you haven't purchased the kit, then you need to go through the guide, which is free on the Riley Blake website. This one came printed for me from Fat Quarter Shop because that's where I bought my kit. But if you don't want to buy a kit, you can get this sew along guide for free on the Riley Blake website. So download that and print it out if you want, or just keep it on your tablet or your laptop or whatever you use to reference digital materials. And then go through there and just kind of add up how much fabric you're going to need. Now, obviously, you can pull from your stash. Maybe you want to make just one of the applique blocks. Maybe you just want to make some of the piece blocks. Whatever you want to do, just figure out what you need to make this quilt. I'm not going to do the math for you because, like I said, I bought the kit, so I'm just going to cut from the kit. But I am going to show you, if you have a kit or if you're putting a kit together on your own, how you would go about getting ready and getting prepared for this sew along. So, like I said, sew along guide, which is free on Riley Blake's website. Sew Simple Shapes that you have to have for those applique blocks, some fabric, and of course, what I like to use is the Pellon 30 interfacing. And this is, it's actually a stabilizer. It's not an interfacing. It's kind of lightweight. I like this. I started using it, I don't know, several years ago, and I really like it for her quilts. So this is what I'm going to be using to trace all my Sew Simple Shapes onto, and we'll just get ready today. So let's head on over to the craft table and let's talk through what we are going to do to get ready for the Sweet Land sew along. Okay, so when I'm preparing for any of the sew alongs that are upcoming with Lori Holt, the first thing I do is I look through the sew along guide. And this is going to be your one-stop shop for all of the valuable information you need, plus her blog posts, of course, and plus her videos that she does, and my videos that I do, of course. But as you look through the sew along guide, you can start to kind of break down the quilt in your mind and decide what you're going to do, how you can get organized, and what is going to be required of you and what supplies you're going to be needing too. So when I look through the sew along guide, I realize that there are a lot of pieces and there's going to be a lot of numbers and a lot of things to keep straight. Now, how are we going to do that? Because like I said, there's a lot of stuff in this pretty small quilt to keep track of. So let's walk through the sew along guide together, talk through that a little bit, and we will break it down. And I'm going to give you some sheets. Anything I create to help myself with this sew along, I will put down in the description box below, so you'll have those resources as well. Okay, so we have this gorgeous cover, and we can see that we have an 88 by 88 inch square quilt. Now it's 88 and a half, but it's basically 88 by 88. And that is with that wide outer border. If you've been watching any of my other videos, you know that I like to hang my quilts on the wall in my living room. I'm gonna have to check to see if 88 is gonna work in my space. That might be a little too big. So I may need to adjust that outer border or leave it off entirely, depending on my space. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind for your space as well, or how you're going to use the quilt, your purpose for the quilt. I always like to know what my purpose is going to be before I start making something, because that way I know if it's going to fit or not. And now you will notice that there are 4 applique blocks on this quilt. All 4 of them are the same in design, but different in fabrics. So we'll need a way to keep track of that. The same thing with these 5 piece blocks, all the same in design, different in fabrics. So we'll want a way to keep track of that. And then we have all these sashing stars. There's 16 of those. Again, same in design, different in fabrics. And then we have this gorgeous zigzag outer border, and we're going to figure out how to keep track of that as well. So here are all of the fabric requirements, all the notions that you're going to need. Now, she does have a cute cut Trimmet ruler of a 16.5 inch, which tells me that these blocks, these main blocks, are all 16.5 inch blocks. And then all of the fabrics are listed. As one thing that I look at when I'm looking through the fabrics is just to see how is she breaking these things down, right? So like here I can see there's sashing number 21. So I'm definitely going to want some labels for my sashing pieces. There's also cornerstones labeled with numbers. So we'll want to make sure that we have some labels for those as well. And then applique blocks 1, 2, and 3. So we'll have to make sure we have some labels for those. So basically everything needs to be labeled. That way we can quickly and easily grab what we need when we need it. Now, the other thing I like to do is look at the Sew Simple Shapes page, because that will tell me how many of each shape in the Sew Simple Shapes that I will need for this quilt. So I can see that there are 8 of those, 8 of those, 8 of those, 8 of those. This makes sense because most of these, there are 4 blocks. If there's 2 of them, then each of them get 2. And then you come down here to these last 2 pieces, and these are for our cornerstones for the stars. And that makes sense too. There's 21 of those. So there are 16 plus 5 in the corners, or in the centers rather, of these piece blocks. So those are 21 stars. So you can kind of look through this Sew Simple Shapes sheet and kind of break down the quilt in your mind in one way too, to just kind of see what's going to be required of each block. And then we get into the block guide, the piece block, and this lists all the fabrics that you need just for this one individual block. So if you just want to make one block, don't worry about all this fabric, all the fabric listed up here up in the front. Just go right back to the block and look what you need of the different fabrics and the different colorways. Maybe you're pulling from your stash and you just want your colorways are going to be completely different because your fabric's different. So you can have this nice block breakdown that shows you what is what, and you'll be able to break down and cut out just for this one block rather than for the entire quilt. So that's another little tip for you if you're just wanting to do 1 block or 2 blocks, or if maybe you want to increase the size of the quilt and you need 6 of these. So you're going to choose block 1 and 2 to make 2 of, or whatever. So definitely we are going to have 5 bags for our 5-piece blocks. And then we have, 4 applique blocks. And again, the design is the same. The fabrics are different. So we'll need 4 bags for those as well, just because I want to keep those separated when I'm cutting and when I'm sorting them out. Now we have our cornerstones, and there are 16 of those. And those will also be broken down in the fabric cutting section at the beginning of the guide. I'm probably going to create labels for all of these. I'm probably not going to have 16 bags. I'm probably going to use just some little binding clips, because there's only, 3 pieces for each of these blocks. I can quickly clip those together and have those in one bag to pull from and work on when I have time to do that. Same thing with sashing. There are, there are 24 pieces of sashing. The only difference in those are the fabrics. So again, I will probably just clip those together. I'll have them labeled 1 through 24 and then clip those together so I can sew them together when I have time. Same thing for all of these pieced border blocks. Now there are a ton of these, okay? So, and you'll notice that some of these say 4 and 51, 3 and 50. So there are definitely some that have more than one. And we'll get to how many of these there are in just a second. I'll show you how to figure that out. But if we keep flipping through, it looks like we're going all the way up to number 120, 136 on these pieced border blocks. So there are a bunch of these, but we will just break it down and do that as we can. Now, here is where you will see how all of those pieces come together. You have your sashing blocks, your cornerstone blocks, and your pieced and applique blocks. All of that is laid out for you right here, nice and neat in the sew along guide. All of them are numbered and labeled. That's why we're going to number and label our pieces, because that way we can look at this guide and say, oh, I need cornerstone 1 and sashing 1 and cornerstone 2 and sashing 2. And if everything's labeled, I can just quickly and easily grab them and sew them together and keep going to build my quilt top. The same thing on those pieced borders. Remember, we have 1 through 136. This shows you exactly how all of those pieces go together. So again, we will keep these things together and labeled so we can quickly and easily grab those from our stash and sew them together into the borders for our quilt. And then this will show you how you get all of your inner border and your outer border and your cornerstones and all of that together to bake it into this gorgeous quilt top. And this is the end result. This is what we're going for, is just one gorgeous quilt top that all comes together and doesn't make us pull our hair out in the process. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do after I look through the sew along guide is I'm gonna go right over to my computer and I'm gonna make my labels, and I will share those documents with you so you will have labels for all of your pieces too, if you wanna get organized in the same way that I am. If you wanna organize yourself differently, then you're gonna have to make your own document. All right, so I have just opened up a Google Sheets document, and I'm just gonna start going through the sew along guide and decide what I need to include. I may revise this as I start pulling things together, but this is where I'm gonna start. So I basically know I have a pieced block 1, and I know that there are 5 of those. And so that gets me up to the applique blocks, and I know there are 4 of those. And then I know I have cornerstones as well. And let's see, we said there were 16 of them. So we'll need to have 16 of those. All right, and so for our cornerstones, I'm gonna kind of do a cheat. I don't know if you're aware that you can do this, but you can do a smart fill in Google Sheets. And basically you put in the first 2 values and then you drag it down and release, and it will continue that series all the way down your page. Now I don't need 19 of them, I need 16 of them. So then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna concatenate. All right, now I can go here and copy and paste the value only, and then all of that can go away. All right, so that was, I know that you might think that took me some time, but believe me, it was a lot faster than it would have taken me if I would have had to type each one of those every time. All right, so now I need sashings 1 through 24. So again, I'm just gonna do a 1 and a 2. Highlight both of those, drag it down, delete the ones I don't need. And once again, I can concatenate, values only. All right, now this time I'm going to leave these numbers. I'm gonna scroll back up to the top because we need 136. Whew, that is a lot. All right. We need 136 of the pieced border blocks for labels. So I'm just going to take this and say 50, 51. All right, so now I have all of my labels done. And, I could make those even if I wanted to, but I don't really care about that. So now I just want to make sure that everything is centered, and we're going to make it bigger, because I don't want to have to read small text. And then everybody's going to be like that. And then these 3 columns definitely need to be wider. So now these are all of our labels that we need to start cutting our quilt. I believe this is all. We're going to double check and make sure, but I believe this is all we're going to need. Now, like I said, if I get around, if I start cutting this out and then realize that there are other things that need to be done, then I will definitely add them onto this. But for right now, this is what we're going to go with. All right, so I'm going to print this, and then I'm going to actually put this to the side because I'm not going to cut out anything quite yet, but I am going to label some bags, and I'm going to sort my So Simple shapes and start tracing my So Simple shapes and sort my fabric for cutting. Okay, now that we have our labels all together and printed, we can start working on the next steps to getting organized. So just so you know, between what you saw and what you see, I added a couple more things and broke down the labels a little differently. On this, you're gonna have 3 sheets to print for your labels for this quilt if you follow my advice. The first sheet will have all of your piece blocks, applique blocks, cornerstones, and sashing labels. So that's all on the first page. The next page is all those border pieces. Now the numbers are smaller, but I just didn't want to like spend a ton of trees to get our labels, and they'll be plenty big. You only have like 3 or 4 pieces for each one of those little border pieces. So this will be plenty of space for that. You'll just cut these out and clip them on with a binding clip, or pin them with a straight pin or a safety pin or whatever you have. And then this last sheet, let me explain this. When I started looking through the sewing guide again, I was like, oh shoot, the piece blocks have pieces A through M. And I don't want you to get confused, and I don't want to get confused on those. So I went ahead and printed out the alphabet from A through M for our piece blocks. So these will go with piece blocks 1 through 5. Our applique blocks will all follow the So Simple shapes. And then we'll have our sashing and border blocks to put together and get those organized as well. So you have 3 sheets of labels to print out if you want to follow my advice and my tips and tricks and see how I'm getting my quilt organized. So I'll put those to the side for right now. And now we're going to get our So Simple shapes organized. Now, the first thing I like to do with my So Simple shapes is just get them in number order. The reason I do that is because that way, when I go to trace them or if I'm cutting out one block, I know that I have all the pieces, just in case something went wrong with the manufacturing and I missed a piece, or maybe I lost a piece somewhere. I want to make sure all of my pieces are together. So I put them in numerical order and I put them on a ring. So let's do that next. Now, as you can see, I have taken this little header piece off of the bag, but I am going to save this because I definitely used this. So don't toss it. And there are only 16 templates for this quilt, which that is a far cry less than many of the other quilts that we've done lately with Lori Holt. So this shouldn't take us too long. All right, and this is set U. So there's 11, and I'm just going to put these in numerical order. All right, so I'm just going to, I use a Crop-A-Dial. This is a We Are Memory Keepers tool. It's a scrapbooking tool, honestly. And I'm just going to punch a hole in each one of my So Simple shapes so I can put them onto this ring. And I'm going to put them in there. I'm going to put them onto the ring in numerical order. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do is because I like to organize my So Simple shapes into binders, and I actually have a video all about that, but I will go ahead and punch a hole in that top tag that was on that bag. I'll put them right onto that ring with all my So Simple shapes. And now they're all in numerical order. They'll be easy for me to grab when I start tracing them. And they'll be easy for me to store and know where they're at and what set it is when I store them as well. Next thing is I'm going to just start cutting apart my various labels for my sashing and cornerstones and applique and pieced blocks. That's a lot, isn't it? So I'm just going to flip these around so I know that these are all the cornerstones and such. And then these are my individual applique and pieced blocks. Now these are going to get their very own bag. Each one is going to have its very own little Ziploc baggie. These, the cornerstones, they're going to all be together in one bag. So these I'll use these as I go along to either pin them or clip them onto the pieces for each one of those. Same thing with the sashing. I will use those as I go along to, I'll have one bag for sashing and then I'll clip those pieces together. Now these border pieces, they're going to be a little different. Okay, so what I'm going to be putting on my table right now is a bunch of bags. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to put these labels onto the bags. And you can see that I've used these bags multiple times. Sometimes I try to take this stuff off. Sometimes I just leave it. It just kind of depends. And this is a Scotch ATG gun. I used it for scrapbooking way back in the day. Now it's just, you know, available for whatever I need to use it for. Now, if you have address labels, you could totally print that out on those, and I've done that before. It works really well. Let's go through what I've done so far just to get organized before I even start cutting for the Sweetland quilt. So as I showed you, I had labels for all my applique blocks, my piece blocks, my sashing, and my cornerstones. So all of those are in one of my project totes right here. The cornerstone labels and the sashing labels, I've cut them apart, put them in numerical order, clipped them together, and they're going to be waiting and hanging out for me. When I start cutting that cornerstone, I'll just start clipping them on to the different pieces for that. And then I also have a bag for each one of, like I said, each one of my applique blocks, each one of my piece blocks, and then there's a bag for sashing and for cornerstones. And that way, it's just going to allow me to, once I start cutting my fabric, I'll start putting the fabric in the appropriate bags or the appropriate places, or I'll start clipping them together for those cornerstones and sashings. And then when I go to start sewing, all I got to do is grab that bag and I have all my pieces. Everything is ready for me and I don't have to go hunting through. I don't have to cut my fabrics as I go. I've just found if I pre-cut everything, I do a lot better with keeping up with the sew along and keeping organized and keeping everything straight in my mind and not wasting fabric. So this is my method so far on just getting organized for that Sweetland quilt along that's coming up with Lori Holt. So like I said, this box, this project tote will only have those bags in it for right now. They're just hanging out and being happy. One more thing to put in that box. The other thing I need to put in that box are my alpha letters, and those are for those pieced blocks. I'm not going to cut them apart into A through M. I'm just going to cut those into the strips for the 5 different ones, and I'll cut out the letter as I need it to label those blocks. That's going to go in this project tote as well. Now, the border pieces, they're going to do their own little thing, kind of, because I'm going to leave this sheet just the way it is for now, but I'm going to grab a couple of my design boards because if you've seen the Scarecrow and the Snowman quilts, those had all of those pieced border blocks that went around the outside, and you have lots of pieces for each one of those, right? Now these piece border blocks, they're going to have like, 3 or 4 pieces per block. So that's not a ton to keep track of, but it is going to be a little bit of an organizational feat if you want to make sure that you have all of your pieces the way they should be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some design boards and I'll put those in this project box. And then as I start cutting my fabric, I can start putting the numbers and clipping them onto the pieces on the design boards that fit inside this box. If you haven't made any of those design boards, check out my video on how to make a no hot glue, no duct tape design board. And you can size it to fit inside your project box or whatever you store your projects in. All right, so they're going to go in here. They're going to hang out in there until I'm cutting my fabric. So all of this can just come off my table for right now because we're going to start tracing some Sew Simple shapes. Now I've had some people tell me, oh my gosh, that seems like so much work to go through just to get organized for this quilt. But I'm telling you, this is like a big quilt and it is kind of a big project. So I've just found for me, the more organized I can begin with, the less frustrations I have as I go along building the quilt. So you do you, and you take on this project however you feel is best for your personality and your mental health. This is just what helps me keep my anxiety in check. So as we discussed right at the beginning of the video, you want to refer to your sew along guide for most of the information that you're going to get about this quilt. And honestly, I feel like if you just look at the sew along guide and read through it and get a good grasp on what you're doing, you really could do this quilt with without too much problem and without too many other media outlets to help you out. But here we go. So in the Sew Along Guide on page 13, it's going to tell you how many of each of the Sew Simple shapes that you need. And remember, I put all of them in numerical order on my ring. So I'm just going to grab the first one and start tracing it. And I will label it on my Pellon interfacing as I'm tracing along. And basically, I'm going to repeat that same process for all 16 shapes. And when I'm done, I'll have a choice to make. I can either leave it together and cut them out for each block that I need them, or I can go ahead and cut them out now and put them in the bags into my project tote, and that way that will be ready for me too when I get to that point in the sew along. And I think that's the option I'm going to go with. According to the Sew Along Guide, we need 8 of the first one. And I'm just using a pencil. You can use a mechanical pencil or you can use a regular pencil. Now, when you're putting these on your interfacing, you just want to make sure that you leave enough space between them that you can cut them apart and get a nice 1/4 inch seam. So I usually leave about 1/2 of an inch between each shape. I just happen to think the way these blocks are laid out, I bet some of these are reversed, and they are. So what I'm going to do is, some of these I'll have to just trace on the back, and that's fine. But I'm going to trace the last 2 the opposite direction, just to make it easier on myself. I'm going to do the same thing with this. The 2 and 3 are also the same way. You will have 2 one way, 4 one way and 4 the other. So you're just going to lay 2 of them with the number up and 2 of them with the number down to trace. Now, before I get too far down the road, what I'm going to do is make sure that I put numbers on all of these so I know which is which. And the ones that are reversed, I'm just putting an R with that number so I know that that is a reversed. And that way I know that like 1 and 1, 1R and 2R go together and 1 and 2 go together. That just helps me keep organized. Same thing for everything else. So the only other one that I noticed that would be reversed is 3. So I'm just going to go ahead and trace those out and then just continue down that Sew Simple Shapes guide, tracing all of my shapes. And then once I get done to the end of tracing the shapes, I will probably cut them apart and go ahead and stick them in bags. I have all of my Sew Simple shapes traced onto my interfacing. And so what I'm going to do next is just divide it up into the 4 applique blocks that we're going to be creating. Now, what I've done before I started recording again was I went ahead and cut all those cornerstone star pieces and put those in the cornerstone bag. And then the other 5, I cut them apart into 15 and 16 for each and put each one of those into the pieced block bags because there's going to be 1 star in the center of the pieced blocks. So all of that is done and out of my way. So all I have left are the applique block shapes. And I can just like look at the cutting guide and know how many of each one that I will have because I have 4 blocks. Divide whatever number is by 4, and that's how many you have per block. So I have 4 binding clips laying on my work table here, and I'm just going to go back through my shapes and reference the Sew Simple shape page in the cutting guide, which is page 13, and cut them apart and put them into piles and put them into my bags. And then I will have everything done to the point of cutting fabric today. And so next time I have time, I can sit down and start cutting fabric and start sorting it into the different bags. So let's get our Sew Simple shape interfacing pieces sorted and put into the bags. So this is shape 1. Remember, we have 1 the way it is and 1 reversed. And I did trace those kind of side by side so I can just cut these out basically in rows. And then I'll lay those over into my 4 piles. Same thing with the birds. There's 1 the way the shape is and 1 reversed. So we'll have 2 birds per block. All right, so those are all in piles. I will just slip those into my bags. I was going to clip them together, but I don't think that that's really necessary. So they'll be fine. I'm just going to slip them into the bags, and they will be happy little campers. They're not going to go anywhere. They want to be part of the quilt. That may seem like a lot of work just to get prepared for a quilt, just for a sew along, but believe me, it really will save me so much time in the long run. I've done, oh goodness, over 10 of these quilt sew alongs now. And each time I learn something a little different. And I've tried it a few different ways, and this is the method that works best for me, just to make sure that all my pieces are traced, all my bags are labeled, all my pieces are going to be labeled, and all my stuff is pre-cut before I begin that quilt along with Lori Holt. So today, just to recap, let's talk about what we did. We got our sew along guide together. We created our labels that we don't get in the sew along guide, but I really like having just for the bags and the different pieces for that stashing and the border blocks and the cornerstone blocks. So all of those are made and ready. All the bags are in my project tote. I took the Sew Simple shapes, I put those in numerical order, and then I traced them all onto the interfacing. I put them in numerical order, remember, to make sure that I had all the pieces, because you never know, you might be missing one, and then you'll be out of luck when you get to that point in the sew along. So they're in numerical order, they've been traced, the interfacing been cut apart and put into the appropriate bags, and I feel like I'm in a really good spot. So the next time I have a chunk of time to set aside, I can go through my fabric and put it in fabric order, and that's the next thing that I'm gonna do. I'll put my fabric in fabric order according to the sew along guide, and then I'll start cutting, start labeling my pieces, putting it in the right bags, and I will be ready on May 19th when the sew along gets started. I hope you picked up a couple of tips and tricks. Maybe you saw something that I do that you want to incorporate into your organization method. Maybe you saw something that you're like, well, that's a different approach. I don't like it, but it's a different approach, and that's fine too. Please leave your comments below the video. I love to hear from you. I definitely respond to those, and I take your suggestions on videos for the future, so please leave your comments. In the description box below, remember, I do have that link to the labels that I created today that you can use for your sweet land to quilt along too. So until next time, find joy in all you do, carve out some time for crafting and creating, and remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.